Good evening all, and welcome. I have some huge news. So the Mortis Media Bedtime Stories app, Mort's Bedtime Stories, is finally available on both iOS, Apple, and Android. So you can download the app. I would sincerely appreciate it if you guys could let me know what you think about the app. Leave a review if you'd like to. That would really mean a lot to me. And yeah, download it, play around with it, let me know what you think. We try and make improvements all the time. I've actually got on my to-do list something to improve on the app already. But it's a secret, I'll let you know later. I also have a special guest joining us today, The Darkest Hour. If you like her narrations, you can find a link to her channel in the description and at the very end that you can click on screen. But for now, I think you're here to listen, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My husband and I moved into this house in December of 2018. Ever since getting pregnant in July of 2019, I've been noticing some weird stuff. Allow me to elaborate. I hear noises constantly, or things would just fall for no reason, even if the fridge door is closed. There was this one time at 3 a.m. I had just heard something metal fall in the living room. We have cameras in some of the rooms of the house, and my camera has night vision and texts me when the baby's crying. Sometimes I'll be outside with the baby, or not at home at all, and I'll get a text saying, "Baby crying in nursery." The night vision will blink on and off, as if the lights are flickering in broad daylight. The camera turns on its own sometimes, and our cat even disappeared in early March, and since then, my husband and I keep hearing a cat meow in various parts of the house. We've searched so profoundly and even started pulling apart the attic on the off chance he got stuck in something, to no avail. Not to mention that my son's room stays cold 24/7. Our summers get as hot as 100 degrees, so we usually keep the AC at 74. Well, my son had this habit of kicking the blanket off at night and then waking up and crying when he got cold, so I started turning the AC off before bedtime. His room felt like 50 degrees regardless. My son, at only 1, does this weird thing where he just stops and stares at nothing, blank wall, ceiling, whatever, and then reaches out to grab the air. It happens multiple times a day, and yet only in the house. The dogs are scared to come in. I literally have to drag them in when it's too hot or too cold. They'll even curl up in a ball by the door and wait to go out shaking. Before my cat disappeared, he wouldn't really leave my son's side. He slept literally in his crib or on the edge of the rail of the crib in the dresser next to the crib. But if I would try to take the cat out of the room at night, he would attack me and return to his spot. This being the most docile cat in the world, which is why it attacking me was super strange. Recently, I woke up to the sound of my bedroom door slamming shut. I usually keep it open so that I can hear my son if he wakes up. My husband works overnight, so it wasn't him. About 10 minutes later, I hear the most gut-wrenching cry and scream. I run in and pick up my son, who's shaking violently and crying. After he calmed down and fell back asleep in my lap, I looked at the camera in his room to see what had happened. He had woken up and stood up immediately, stared across the room, reached for the air, and then his whole body started trembling so hard I could see it on camera that he just starts screaming. He had nightmares before, but he usually wakes up and just lays there and cries until I pick him up. Soft cries. Nothing as scary as the ones I experienced that night. And there was once when my baby was asleep in the house in his room, and I was outside with in-laws around 11 p.m, and we all heard a baby crying loudly in the house, so we ran inside to check, but he was fast asleep. But everyone heard this, not just me. When I bring it up to my husband, he gets annoyed with me for believing in ghosts and tells me to stop. But I'm literally scared to fall asleep because the noises have started again. So tonight I had a very serious talk with my husband about everything and seriously wanting to move. The main reason being the ghost, but there are other reasons too. When I first met him, he was my supervisor. We had both transferred to the same location in the same month. We were both new, so kind of stuck together and instantly became close friends. I knew he had a girlfriend of 6 years that he had just moved there with, and I had no intentions of interfering. We were genuinely just like work friends. One day he came up to me and told me that he was done with her. He broke up with her and she was moving out. That he realized he didn't want to go home for her for the past year because he wasn't happy, but didn't realize that he was so unhappy until seeing how happy he was around me. So she moved out, and a few months later, we started dating, and bam, accidentally pregnant. But apparently when her mum came down to help her move her stuff out of the house, she had a crystal ball with her that she kept rubbing and whispering something to. She's really into brujeria. It's witchcraft in English, I think. And my husband said that's the reason it's been so cold, because he knows it's not a ghost, but pretty sure her mum to this day is holding a grudge and cursing me in some way, or the house. He just tries not to think about it, because he feels like if he feels his anger and fears it, it'll feed into it. That's why it's mostly my son that is physically affected, because apparently his ex wanted to have kids. My husband did not want to have kids with her, as she's very manipulative, and when she found out I was pregnant, she lost her mind. Apparently, he was also worried about making me more scared or worried because he didn't want to tell me, as I have borderline disorder and I tend to overreact. But that's why he wanted to present our baby to the church despite not being religious, just in case. His dad will be by this week to bless the house. So it turns out my father-in-law was going to come and bless the house on Sunday after his church sermon, as he's a pastor. But the Friday before, he suffered a stroke. He was eating and couldn't move one side of his body. My son wakes up with nightmares still, or talks to the wall or reaches out like someone is there. I still hear baby cries in the house, even when the babies are asleep or not even home. My dogs are still terrified to enter my house. And about 2 weeks ago, our house almost caught fire. We have a small laundry room that's only big enough for the washer and dryer, and some rooms for the doors to open and close. On the top shelf above the washer is our laundry soap. One day when my kids were at Grandma's house, I was on the way to pick them up, and my husband was sleeping. He said he heard a loud thud and got up to see what it was. The washer and dryer were never on, and the soap was pushed towards the wall on the back of the shelf. But when he got up, the soap had fallen off the shelf and busted open on the washer and floor, and hit the plugs behind it, and everything started catching fire. My husband was thankfully there and was able to put it out, and immediately shut the breaker off. When I got home, the brake had been turned back on, and he swears he didn't do it, but the soap had dried, so nothing caught fire again.
This isn't my story, but my mom's, from when she was relatively new out of high school. She and a friend went on a trip to Florida in the late 1980s, as her parents, my grandparents, had a small vacation home in Florida at the time. However, they ended up staying somewhere else, which is where this story begins. The house they ultimately stayed in was cheap, and for good reason. A woman had been killed in the home some time ago, and being the site of a murder, very few people wanted it, so my mom and her friend got it. However, there was another reason why nobody else wanted it. That reason being that it was allegedly haunted. My mom, of course, didn't believe it, and neither did her friend. Then, one night, while she was in the bathroom, she felt something touch her leg several times, frightening her. Her friend also had the same thing happen to her in the same bathroom. Come to find out, the woman was killed in that bathroom, and among her injuries included cuts and bruises to her legs. The two of them endured it until the vacation ended, and otherwise had a good time in Florida. But they never forgot about what happened in that bathroom.
We live in a newer home that we had built. We moved in 2018. Ever since we moved in, I would hear things like footsteps or scratching. I would see what appeared to be shadows. It got to be as much as a forceful tap on my shoulder. This has gone on since we moved in. I'm home most of the time by myself. My wife and daughter are gone during school hours while I work from home. I have 2 dogs that mostly sleep all day in the dog bed behind me. This means I should not hear anything occurring outside of the immediate room I'm in. Recently, my daughter has said that she no longer feels safe in her room at night, also in the basement. She's 9. We explained to her that there's nothing to be afraid of and that she has both dogs to keep her company at night. She replies that the dogs no longer feel safe either. That's a hard one to understand. So in the last 2 weeks or so, we moved her furniture upstairs. My office remains down there, however. Since moving her room to the main floor, she claims to feel at ease and that she can sleep at night. One big thing, however. Now, I feel somewhat terrified to work downstairs during the day. It's hard to explain. I feel like all day I'm being watched. I feel brushes of cold air when the fan and air conditioner are off. One of the dogs, Luna, came down the hall the other day and froze halfway. She got really low to the ground and basically crawled into the office. She had this terrified look about her. She looked like someone was yelling at her or about to hit her. For the record, we do not hit our dogs, but she just had that look, like she was getting swatted. When she got to me, she was shaking, so I called for Daisy to come into the room, our other dog. She came down the hall and started to growl as she walked past the part where Luna had just been. She quickly went around the corner, turned around with her back to me, and stared down the hall. She was as stiff as a board, and I didn't move for several minutes despite me calling her over and over again. I managed to capture a full minute of her stance, and it creeped me out. Clearly both dogs saw something that I could not. This has been playing into some of my fears and makes me wonder if my daughter not feeling safe anymore is related. More so in the last few weeks. I've also found lights on that should be off and others that are never on. And again, I'm the only one home. So either something is happening or my mind is playing tricks on me. There have also been a few neighbors that have complained of issues lately. Things being moved, TVs turning on when no one's home, pets being locked in rooms, or dogs and cats fixating on things that shouldn't be there. How can we find out the spiritual history of our land is something I'd like to know. A little while after, it turns out that our dogs had calmed down. That was until I woke up in the middle of the night from what I suspected was a dream. It felt like the dog was jumping off the bed, which normally I don't notice, but it jostled me enough to wake me up. I slept on my side, so I slowly opened my eyes, and, as they adjusted or whatnot, I believed I saw something or someone at the edge of my bed. At that height they would have been on their knees, and I just heard, "You can call me Gary." Such an uncommon name. I don't know any. I don't work with any. None of my clients are named Gary. That is a name that was not on my mind. In other news, not sure I mentioned this before, but one of the neighbors around the corner who have experienced a lot of activity in their daughter's nursery. Their house caught fire a week or so ago. Their house is less than 2 years old. It caught fire and they lost everything. The fire marshal said it started in their basement. Otherwise, things remain normal-ish, and I'm in a meeting with a medium tomorrow. Her initial research has her thinking that we live on a burial site, which of course is fantastic.
The house that I grew up in had a spirit of some kind residing in it. I thought it would be fun to reminisce on my past experiences, so I'll go in chronological order. My grandpa lived in the house before my parents and I, and died in the house. We moved into the home, which is quite old, a few months after he passed. I was around 5 years old at the time. I have a very clear memory of walking into the kitchen and my deceased grandpa pouring me a glass of soda with a wink and a "don't tell your mom." Now, I would think that was just a memory I had with my grandpa while he was still alive, but I remember walking into the kitchen with a glass of soda and the look of shock on my mom's face. She kept it in a place where I couldn't possibly reach it and turned pale white when I informed her Grandpa had given it to me. This next one is probably the only scary experience I've ever had in the home, and I don't actually believe it was the spirit that was normally in the home because of the uncharacteristic violence it displayed. Around the time this occurred, my older brother started a goth phase. He was extremely interested in Satanists and brought a Ouija board into our home. I was probably around 10 or 11 around the time that this occurred. I was sitting in my room playing my Nintendo DS when I got the distinct feeling that I was being watched. I felt drawn to this particular corner of the room for some reason, and I felt almost in a trance-like state. Suddenly, behind me, I felt something that appeared to be quite large, breathing its hot breath on me. I immediately turned to leave my room and broke into a run as soon as I hit the stairs. I heard this loud screech that was unlike any other sound I've ever heard, followed by a loud crash. My dad was downstairs in the living room and hadn't heard a thing. I couldn't fall asleep in my room for weeks after that, and I firmly believe that this encounter was with a demon. Probably a year or so following this incident, I had another encounter with a spirit. At this point in time, my fraternal grandfather had moved in with us due to health difficulties. A friend of mine was spending the night, and we sat on the bed chatting, waiting for my grandfather to go to sleep in the bedroom across from mine, so that we could go to the living room and watch TV. At the angle my bed was, you could see the wall by the stairs, but not the stairs themselves. We heard heavy, obvious footsteps climb the staircase and saw someone's shadow move along the wall. When whoever it was reached the top of the stairs, it appeared to stop, looking in the direction of my room for a brief moment. Then it continued on into the bedroom across the hall, with my friend and I both hearing the door open and shut. Of course, we assumed it was my grandfather at this point, so we walked downstairs to watch some South Park. We stopped dead in our tracks when we saw my grandfather sitting in the chair, watching the news. My parents had already gone to bed, and no one ever came back out of the bedroom. So either someone had broken into our house and hid in my grandfather's closet all night, or my friend and I encountered something else that night. Shortly after this, my mom had a priest come and bless the house after my friend and I told her about the experience, just to be safe, in addition to installing a security system. I'm in my 20s now, and I no longer live at home, but even in my adult years, I've had a few experiences. The most frequent occurrence being when I sometimes am sitting home alone in the living room. I'll hear the kitchen door open clear as day and hear footsteps going up the stairs. Of course, every time I go to investigate, nothing's ever there. I also hear whispering coming from my brother's old room from time to time, as do my parents. I actually found out somewhat recently that they would hear things that they couldn't explain sometimes, whispering, footsteps, but never mentioned it to me as a child so that I wouldn't be scared. My most recent encounter happened a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's really cute personally. I was in the kitchen making one of those whipped coffees, and I had my hair up in a high ponytail. While I was using the very loud hand mixer, I felt someone come behind me and playfully kind of slap my ponytail. I turned around thinking it was my mom, but no one was there. Ironically, this was the exact same spot where nearly 15 years ago, my grandpa had poured me that soda. On this particular day, I'd been working on this very stressful essay that would determine where and if I'd get into a graduate program. I like to think that it was just my grandpa letting me know that he was around and that it'll be okay. While I did have a scary experience once in the home, I don't believe it was the same entity that I've encountered on other occasions. Unfortunately, I think at one time my idiot brother had probably invited a not-so-kind spirit into the home. However, I think all of my other experiences were either my grandpa or a deceased owner who was just hanging around.
During college, I experienced what I thought was a potential haunting, due to certain events that made my room scary to hang out in. Everyone agrees it was a haunting, especially after we did a ghost hunt and got an EVP. The first event happened while my sister was in school, and parents were on a date, and my grandmother was in her room on the other side of the house. I was napping before heading to school. As I'm laying there, I hear footsteps down the hallway. My door is wide open, so I look out to see no one. I lay back down, and then the door slowly creaks closed. I roll over, and it slams shut. Panicking, I start yelling at my family, but no one says anything. I text everyone, and they're still where they were. I feel creeped out but try ignoring it. That is until the door slowly creaks back open, and once again I see no one. I start yelling for my grandmother, and I hear her door open and start making her way towards me. I'm staring at the hallway but see nothing aside from her walking towards me, and I begin freaking out, explaining to her what's going on. And right as she reaches my room, the door slams shut. She too is shaken by this, quickly opening my door and rushing me to her room. This type of event never happened again. The next thing to happen is in regards to the heat event. Now, everyone would think an animal would be responsible, but how do you explain it being pushed out and hearing constant scratches when there are no animals to be seen, both in the vent and under the housing during said events? To explain what exactly happened, I'll talk about the events and the vent itself. You can find it at the foot of my bed, which is where my sister's bed is now. It was positioned between my bed and the television, and then my computer was to the right, and a wall was to the left. Not long after the door event, I was playing with my computer and started hearing faint scratches. Living in the woods, you get used to animals under your manufactured home. Well, it was weird, but I ignored it, until there was a banging against the vent. It looked like something was pushing up against it. I picked up my feet just in case, and just watched it, but nothing else happened. A few nights of this happening, my dad decided to check it out. Putting on gloves, he lifted off the vent, but nothing happened. The scratches continued without the vent being in place. My dad lowered a camera in there, but nothing was in the vent. He then went outside to look under the house. The siding came off easily, and still saw nothing but heard the scratches. We kept an eye on it, even having an exterminator check it out, but nothing came up. I started freaking out over the idea of something grabbing my feet, and so began putting my huge textbooks on top of the vent. I'd hear the scratches go on all night, fall asleep, then wake up to the books toppled over and the vent popped out. Nothing ever showed itself in my room. I had the door locked because my boyfriend lived in the room with me, so no one was coming in to mess with the books. This went on for months just before stopping abruptly. The night it stopped, we had another event. This was just simple but scary as heck. My boyfriend and I were sleeping. We noticed that the scratches were gone and were in thought, wondering what was going on. As we lay there in the dark, we feel pressure on our legs. Our blanket is literally being ripped off us, downwards as if being pulled towards the vent. We panic and scream and then turn on the light, only to find that the vent is in place along with the books. This also never happened again. The last event that happened and sparked my sister to have us try ghost hunting was a few days later during the beginning of summer term. My boyfriend was at his laptop on the bed and I was on my computer. Our door was open and we were just there playing Aeon. All of a sudden, my bedstead curtain starts swaying in the door like someone just walked in. I look down and literally see a dark childlike figure crawling on the floor right by my doorway. The curtains are scrunched around it. It had holes where the eyes would have been. I freaked out, and it's just gone in a flash, but my sister in the other room, along with my boyfriend and I, hear what sounds like quick crawling down the hallway. This freaked us out, and we decided to go ghost hunting that weekend. I put up a cheap camera that my mum had gifted me and set it on my computer desk and aimed it at the vent. It had no night function, so it captured mostly sound. We take our 3 phones, all the same kind, and use each one to either film, take pictures, or voice record. We ensure everyone is hanging outside and turn off the electricity. When we went around looking throughout the rooms, nothing is found at first, until we listened to the recordings on the cheap camera. During the time we were getting ready, while we were in the hallway and about to close the door, we picked up what sounded like a dog breathing in the mic. It breathes normally as we're speaking but then stops, sucking in a breath like it's been caught. When my boyfriend thinks he hears something weird in my room, it then began breathing for a few seconds before stopping again. When I responded, "What?" in a panicked way before breathing a moment, then stopping again. The breaths happen in between us all talking, as if it wouldn't be noticed, but then stops right as we start talking. It's almost as if something or someone was hiding in my room. Obviously, there wasn't, since my room was so small that my bed was in the closet and didn't have doors and there was no space under my bed for anyone to hide. This EVP is the only thing found, and it was beginning in my room. We had shut the door after leaving, and nothing abnormal happened when we opened it. The vent was intact, the camera was in the same place. It creeped us out though that I slept with the TV on just in case. After that was discovered, we uploaded it to YouTube and went on with life. Nothing scary ever happened again. Luckily, I even had someone clean up the clip for me and they confirmed that there were a total of 4 different voices. The breathing was there no matter how much they edited it, and they couldn't explain exactly what it was, but they thought maybe it was an animal. We did have a cat, but she was in her pet carrier outside during the hunt. Whatever it was, made for an odd experience I will never forget.
This happened to me about 15 years ago. I live in Taiwan, working as an English teacher. I've lived in the same apartment for many years, and this took place a couple of years after I moved in. For some reason, the air conditioning in my living room and my bedroom started to randomly turn on and off, as did the TV. At first, it was only once a day. Over the course of a couple of months, it slowly escalated to happening 3 or 4 times a day for the AC and a dozen times a day for the TV. I slowly got more and more annoyed with this, until I finally had had enough. One day, after the TV had turned itself off 6 or 7 times in a half an hour, I put down the remote, stood up quietly, and just glared at the room, as though I were addressing a classroom full of rowdy kids. After half a minute, first in Mandarin, then in English, I said, "Look, I don't mind if you live here with me. I'm not scared of you. But I won't put up with this, playing with my TV and air conditioning. If you keep doing it, I'm going to unplug everything, and you'll have nothing left to play with." From that day on, the TV and living room air conditioner never misbehaved again. The bedroom air conditioner only did it once more, several years later. I'd moved out to live with a girlfriend, big mistake, for 2 years. After breaking up, I got a lucky break in that the apartment was available again. So I moved back in. My first week, The apartment air conditioner turned itself on once while I was sleeping, and never again after that. I like to think that it was kind of a welcome back. There had been one time the girlfriend insisted on doing some apartment cleaning while I was out. She later told me that after I left, she felt like she was being glared at, and a door suddenly slammed when there was no wind to push it.
I grew up in a suburb right outside of Montreal in Quebec. Most of the homes in this particular area were built in the 50s and 60s. There was this house, number 217, that my mum always admired. She knew the owners and would help the lady carry her groceries home. 20 years later, this house went up for sale and my mother begged my father to put in an offer. They had just experienced a large financial loss, and my dad wasn't ready to buy another home. However, to please my mother, he provided an offer he could afford. This offer was way below what they were asking, yet they accepted the offer without question. The house at the time had been owned by the previous couple's son. I was 9, and my sister was 6 when we moved into 217. My parents owned the home for 22 years, in which the only comfortable years were the last 7. To say the house was haunted was an understatement. So much so, we rarely speak of it today. People always questioned how people stay in homes like these, but my parents struggled a lot during this time, so a move was never possible and not affordable. There are many stories, but the one I'm going to tell you is about the one that completely flipped my mum out and had her demand to my father to find help to be rid of them. Sharing this story so many years later is giving me chills and actually making me feel uncomfortable, but I will proceed. My bedroom, you see, was the most active. It was at the back of the house and had a huge window. One night, I was exceptionally frightened to go to sleep. My mum said she'd stay with me that night, as she could see that I was visibly shaken. Mind you, I was over 20 at this point and not a little girl. There had been nightly occurrences, and I was done. That night I had a dream. In the dream it was a super still winter morning. The sun wasn't up yet, and I could hear the wind. I was at a bus stop, and there was a group of about a dozen people standing behind me in a perfect semicircle. Everyone was fully covered, face as well, with scarves and gloves, so I couldn't see their faces. So I wondered if the reason I couldn't see their faces was because I wasn't wearing my glasses. I reached into my pocket and pulled them out. Suddenly there was an elderly man in front of me. He grabbed both sides of my glasses with these super thick brown leather gloves and helped me slip them onto my face. I believe he spoke too, but it's been near 30 years and I've forgotten that part. Before I could focus in my glasses, I woke up. I felt a heavy weight against my back and thought it was odd. Why is my mum so close to me? That's when it gets really weird. I realized I was lying on my stomach. I looked over and saw my mum. She was at least 1.5 feet away from me and asleep. I began to panic. I slowly tried to get up, yet the more I tried, the heavier the pressure against my back got. I counted to 3 and jumped from the bed quickly. I felt whatever it was roll off the bed, and I heard it run out the room. I looked over, and my mum was sitting up on the bed with a look of incredible fear in her eyes. "Did you see that?" she asked. So I said, "No, but I had a weird dream." She asked me to tell her first. I do. She then proceeds to tell me what she saw. She said she woke up and turned to see me. Now, to give you perspective as to how she saw this, the large bed in this room was pushed up against the wall, and I had been sleeping on that side. She said the wall looked as though she had just been looking at a large movie screen, like a projected image, in which she saw a semicircle of spirits in a shadow form surround me in a semicircle. She then said, I opened my eyes and said to her, "Mummy, don't worry, they like me." She looked up, and hovering above me was another spirit. At that moment, she said, I shot up, and suddenly, the spirit floating above me flipped around off the bed and out the room, and she heard it run out the room too. That morning, my mum had enough. We had endured this house for long enough, and she and my dad found someone to remove the spirits. They finally succeeded with the help of multiple people, and they finally enjoyed the home for 7 more years, but we often felt that they never really left. To this day, the number 217 gives me the creeps. Typing this out now is making me feel uneasy. My sister never wants to talk about the house, and she too gets goosebumps just seeing that number. I wonder if the people who live there now feel the same.
When I was a teenager, I lived in a house that had some freaky stuff go on. I believe in ghosts, but my dad doesn't, and he claims he's heard and seen stuff. The one incident that stands out to me the most is one day there was a knock on the door, and I went to answer it. As I passed by our spare bedroom, I saw my sister sitting bolt upright on the sofa, just staring ahead, wearing her uniform. I didn't realize she was home, so I said, "Hello." She didn't answer me back, and I remember thinking, what a moody brat. I opened the door, and it was my sister in her uniform, her hair done the exact same way. I asked her if she'd jumped through the window as a prank. She's still adamant to this day that she never did. The weird thing is that everyone in my family has seen each other in the house when that person wasn't supposed to be there. Like my younger sister seeing my cousin in the window, or my other sister seeing me out the back when I was at my boyfriend's. Creepy place. Glad we moved.
When I was 4, my dad finally managed to get a house with my stepmom. It was a great accomplishment. My stepmom was happy about the accomplishment. That was until she realized that I was a bit more than she expected. She asked me if I disliked the house. Through her words, my response shook her to her core instead of answering her question. I looked her dead set into her eyes and said in an unwavering manner, "The house is haunted," which was strange being that I was only 4, and I didn't really believe her. That is until I read her facial expressions. There was no indication of lying or making things up, which discomforts me still. Nonetheless, my dad at the time tried to shrug off my words and thought that I was just joking in an attempt to uplift my stepmom's excitement. For the next 5 years, I would grow up in that house with discomfort every time I slept in. I didn't feel like I was alone. I would grow up suspicious. It was until I felt like I was being watched that it would cause me to flee from my room in distress at the dead of night, crawling to my father in fear. He would shrug it off, claiming that I was just paranoid or tired, and that it would be the cause of me experiencing such things. My stepmom would always wake up to the feeling of being watched, and some nights would flee to the living room area near the front door and fall asleep on the couch. Dad believed that it was just hormones kicking in due to her soon being a mother. Before my stepmom gave birth to my first little sister, I had an experience. I woke up one night feeling the need to wee. I climbed out of bed and did my business, and came back only to stop when I realized that my window was open. I didn't know if it was open before, but what really made my stomach drop was the feminine black figure. I didn't move. I felt like if I did, something terrible would happen. So I didn't. After a small while, I bravely took a step, and it snapped its head at me, and the dark figure zoomed under the bed, and I broke out in tears. I ran to my dad and slept with him. I don't remember the rest of the night, but when I woke up, I saw a trail of throw-up leading to the bathroom from my spot. Then my stepmom gave birth to a baby girl. Then There was another experience before my younger sister was born. It was during the summer. We were getting ready to go to the lake. I was confused though because I heard a bunch of banging outside in the backyard and began looking around. I found my dad and asked him if he was okay. Turns out he wasn't the source of the banging. I would have to continue the searching. If it wasn't for my father calling for me to help get water, the backyard was suddenly on fire. I was so scared, but my stepmom got a hold of the fireman. I swore to God when fleeing, I saw another dark feminine figure waving. Soon enough, my stepmom gave birth again to a girl. The last straw of the house for me was when I encountered dark male figures in a lampshade, and I thought I saw a chair moving. I screamed and ran downstairs to tell my parents in tears and snot, all while tripping down the stairs. My dad did research on the house with people who were familiar with these types of things. Next thing I know, we moved out, and I was told to never tell my sisters why we really moved. But now that I'm watching them grow up, their two figures and shadows remind me of the two black feminine figures which I encountered in that house.
My strangest, most unexplained experiences maybe could be explained, but I don't know. In our home, there were 2 unlit candles for decoration, standing on top of an old box TV with a wide, flat surface. They were covered in dust because they were never used and just stood there and weren't really cleaned. We're chatting in the living room with a bunch of guests. It was some sort of birthday party or get-together, when suddenly, one of the candles, which was placed far from the edge, drags itself across the surface and falls down. Everyone heard, and I sat right by the TV and saw it. We all had a what the heck moment, and we didn't know what happened. We just picked it up and put it back. As strange as it was also normal for doors to open and close on their own, as well as hearing weird noises and footsteps. My aunt came over once. She used to be a healer and some sort of medium, and told us there was a ghost. She explained that there were new people living here, and he needed to leave. After that, there was nothing, until my grandpa passed away. One night at around 2 or 3 a.m., when I was about to sleep, I heard a Christmas music box playing right outside my door. Everyone was asleep except me. Their bedrooms are upstairs, while mine is downstairs. It played a few notes, really loud, and stopped. Kinda like when you wind up a music box, and it sorta has little hiccups, or what do you call them? But anyway, it stopped for like a few minutes, and then suddenly played again. Except this time, it played for 3 to 5 minutes straight, with no breaks or hiccups. When it finally stopped, I dared to look outside the door, against my better judgment, and saw nothing. When I looked again, a little later, I found the music box on top of the shelf, next to my door, out of my reach. I'm short. Just sitting in the corner. Felt like I was in a horror movie. The weird shadow man I saw approaching me in my bedroom while I was terrified in my bed and couldn't move much. Sleep paralysis hallucination probably, but creepy. One moment it was there watching me, and the next it was gone. Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Jane. I wanted to give a big thank you to Mort for having me on tonight's show. And I hope you all enjoyed my narrations. If you did, I premiere new scary story narrations every Friday night, and I'd love to share them with you. So head on over to my channel, The Darkest Hour YT, and hit that subscribe button. It really does mean the world. Thank you all so much, and stay spooky.